the question now I would like to ask is that the first confrontation a child has with the written language is when children listen to the stories that their parents read to them. And their mind goes and create these pictures. And this is why the stories that you were read as a child are so vividly still in the brain, like the Bible stories that we used to hear, or other children's stories and so forth. So the question is, and we have in the rooms here a lot of language teachers, sorry, not linguists, but language teachers. The question is, would it not benefit many if we in language learning went back to the old storytelling style as opposed to text-based language learning, text-based language learning as in the books and dialogues, what's happening these days? Yes, and now we're talking now L2, the language acquisition. I know that's not really your expertise.
So are you thinking now first language acquisition or second language?
Both, actually, both. Yeah, but it could benefit the research in the first language acquisition, could benefit the second language acquisition. Therefore, would love to hear your view on this.
It's now known that a newborn infant can distinguish the language of its mother from a different language, both of them spoken by a woman's voice that they've never heard before. And the languages differentiate in interesting ways. But in any event, language is reflexively acquired by the child without any instruction at all. So language acquisition studies don't pay attention to this, but there is an incredible step that takes place instantly. In fact, even pre-birth. The child is surrounded by a huge mass of data of all kinds, what William James called a booming, buzzing confusion. There's a mass of confusion out there. Somehow, the child, the infant, selects out of that confusion data which is language related. Now, how does the child do that? So, for example, if the child has, say, a pet kitten or a pet chimpanzee or whatever, which has exactly the same data, it can't do that. And nobody knows exactly how it's done. But in some fashion that we don't understand, the infant reflexively selects out of the complex data information that's language related. And also reflexively, the child, long before any instruction, begins to organize that material in terms of the structures of its internal language capacity, its innate language capacity. And in fact, a great deal of language learning is proceeding before the child gives any evidence of having that knowledge, before it's producing anything. Furthermore, at the point where the child begins to articulate and the parent or other people can see that something's happening, a lot of language is already known, and what the child then goes on to pick up is related in some fashion to instruction, but it goes on even if there's no instruction. So, for example, children typically pick up the language of their peers, not the language of their parents. So, for example, I don't speak with my father's Russian accent or my mother's New York accent. I speak in the manner of the children in the small corner of the city where I grew up. And I think if you look at yourselves, you'll probably find the same thing. The language is mostly picked up from peers without instruction. Parents may try to give instruction, and it probably has some effect, but it's probably a peripheral effect. So first languages aren't really taught, they're acquired. And it's not even clear that the word learning is appropriate. They're kind of acquired the way your visual system matures differently depending on the visual experience. Second language instruction is usually quite different. It can be the same as first language acquisition. So maybe a 3-year-old is moved to another country, and then it picks up that language almost reflexively, pretty much the way it picked up its first language. Sometimes, let's say, an adult is taught some second language in college, and that's a very different process. For one thing, it's not universal, but for most people, there are individual differences. But for most people, the capacity to acquire a language changes at various stages of maturation. One major stage is roughly puberty. After puberty, most people have difficulty in picking up the second language far beyond what they had pre-puberty. And there are other stages that can be identified too. And though there is individual variation, those generalizations are true. And then you pick up languages in different ways. I mean, some people, say adults, can pick up a second language just by immersing themselves in the society. So, for example, I have one daughter who knew no Spanish at all, but went to live in Central America when she was about 30, and after about 2 years is regarded as considered to be a native speaker. If people don't see her, if she's talking over the telephone, they think she's a native speaker. They see her, of course, they see she isn't. Other people, like, say, me, have a terrible time picking up second languages. I pick them up mostly by reading. I could live in a country for years, I probably wouldn't understand anything. The reasons for those differences aren't understood, but they're clear. But in any event, for almost all people, again, there's a small range of exceptions, but for almost all people, picking up a second language is a very different process than picking up a first language. It typically involves either instruction or conscious self-instruction, like reading, using dictionaries, and so on. There undoubtedly are effects of the first language on the second language, and possibly, as in your case, there's an effect in the other direction. But that just shows that humans are complicated creatures, and many intricate things are going on in our minds, in our cognitive development that affect the exact form of what results. But reading to children is undoubtedly a very important activity for their emotional development, their intellectual and cultural development, and so on. It probably doesn't have outside of any awareness or effort, that the conscious efforts can at most have a kind of a marginal effect on it.
Thank you very much, Noam.